Okay, hi, hi friends. And well, there was a little mishap in the last program, 5 minutes approximately, from 31:05 to 36:54 were silent. They were a pantomime, and rather than send that in for editing and spend a number of days doing that and have to work around the problem instead of doing other forward-looking work, I've decided to keep those 5 minutes of pantomime. Just as I say, if for any reason you went ahead and you stopped at that point, then just go from 31:05 to 36:54 and the voice resumes. And right now I'm going to take up what I missed last time. And I'll say just a few things about it. He's been talking to us about, sensing the vision, recognizing the hindrances, overcoming prejudice and fear, and then not waiting for Master DK to tell you what to do, but just to do it what you think is correct. And all the while, keep your mind free from hate. Right. So this was the segue, and my apologies for the little mess up. When I begin to have an editing studio here, maybe I can handle these things, but right now I would have to send it out to my colleagues. They would have to find time to do it, and then maybe send it back to me, and then I send it to you. So it's just 5 minutes, and anything can happen. Now I'm learning what caused it. And, in these programs where I'm pretty much talking to myself, I have to have another computer going. Otherwise, the program remains unstable if I'm just broadcasting to no apparent audience. So now I have that other computer going. And hopefully we don't run into any difficulties as we did the last time. So this is about the lover of humanity. So by thought, word, and deed, the lover of humanity enters into the battle against evil. With complete self-forgetfulness, he will take up the cause of humanity, hiding not behind the sense of futility and seeking no alibi in a misinterpreted idealism, such as the idealism of peace at any price. He will face the facts of the presented situation in the light, which streams from the vision itself. And this is, of course, a very important factor. If I seem to be repeating a little bit, please just bear with me. It's never quite the same. He will face the facts of the present situation in the light, which streams from the vision itself. He will then press forward into the age of right human relations, of spiritual unity and shared resources with complete confidence, because his sense of values is adjusted. So that's the whole thing. What do we desire the most? You can always tell which way a person is heading by speaking to them about the direction of their desires. He knows that humanity has a divine mission, as a great station of light, I might add, which must be carried out on the wings of love. Which must be carried out on the wings of love, so that humanity can be a fusing center, bringing together the lower and the higher kingdoms. A divine mission which must be carried out on the wings of love through understanding action, selfless service, and the willingness to die in battle if that is the only way in which his brother can be served and freed. And this, of course, the motive of the Christ and all great ones who have given the last and final measure. Having now presented the attitude towards which the present world crisis, which seems to me, consistent with all that I have taught in the past and in line with the teaching of the hierarchy, and having made clear, so that's one factor. Okay, so this is the first factor. And and what? And so this is the second factor. And having made clear the basic dualism which underlies this conflict and pointed out the lines of demarcation which are clearly emerging, I now call upon all of you to stand with the forces of light. That is the final line. He has said at various times, see that you battle. Here he's asking you to stand, asking me to stand with the forces of light. And even now, when there is so much betrayal of the principles which the hierarchy has sought to instill within the governments of the world and humanity in general, and yet there is no global shooting war, we still have to stand with the forces of light. I don't see, given the intentions of some of the leaders, I don't see how hierarchy can relax for a moment. Now, this is an area where there was a problem, and suddenly a telephone took over the work of the computer audio, and there was motion accompanied by silence. These are difficult and terrible days. Men and women are needed who have the courage and the insight to stand with steadfastness and to take those steps which are needed, no matter what they may be, to bring this war to an end. Now note, we're in approximately June of 1940, and this is really just about 5 years from when the war actually ended, the cessation of hostilities on the physical plane. I'm sure the Tibetan hoped for better and for more. Vast sections of humanity can do no more than acquiesce in the unhappy fate which has overtaken them. They are unable to think or pray or even to summon faith to their aid. In short, they are exhausted. And DK, really, he said, look, we can't have this war go on too long, or humanity itself might enter a state of exhaustion, which seemed to imply a terminal outcome. They feel without hope. For them you must think, for them you must pray, for them you must have faith, and above all else at this time, for them you must act. The work of reconstruction lies in the future. That's the forces of reconstruction under Gemini. So much happened, 1943, 1945, related to the sign Gemini, which in a way we can call the head of the cosmic Christ. The demand today is for the building of a bulwark of defense around humanity, just as the hierarchy provides that great defending wall of energy and says to a number of those who are working on the reappearance of the Christ that we have protected you. You are marked out for protection, and later you will see that we have done this. And the implication is how vulnerable you would have been had we not done this. Then, having fulfilled every physical plane requirement to stand immovable, as I said with St. Paul, having done all to stand. And this is related to a word of power connected with the fourth ray, steadfastness. When we look at the personality of St. Paul, knowing that he was probably at the time a sixth to second ray soul with a fifth ray and first ray monad, he needed to stand immovable in his conviction. But you must stand with faces turned towards the enemy of the souls of men, ready to do battle, literally and physically, ready to take every needed step to drive the enemy back, and ready to sacrifice to the uttermost so that he may advance no further. I told you about, in the earlier program, about the magician in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf, and how he faced the Balrog, this huge demon from the depths, and, said, "You shall not pass, you shall not pass." So, your work will therefore be of a threefold nature: the method of standing, on the levels of mental consciousness, on the emotional side of life. You will be directed to pursue every mode of practically alleviating the pain. I'm just going to sort of mark these out a little bit more clearly. And then the physical plane standing, you will not be occupied with the problem of what to do, because you will be shouldering your due share in arresting the advance of the forces of aggression. Well, I expanded on those 5 lost minutes a bit, but I think we have now covered what had disappeared. There's all kinds of ways to help, every time I run into it. I see that there are things that need reconsideration. I told you about how Mary Bailey drove an ambulance, Mars in Pisces, right, during that war, as it hit Great Britain. So there's all kinds of ways that one can help, but somehow strengthening, aiding the Allies. And your will to good will be thrown behind every attempt to frustrate the activities of the evil alliance, which you may find in your environment. You have to look out for the good of your own country, while at the same time swelling the tide of national effort to end the war through the tangible victory of the forces of light. Okay. So, now we've reached the point where we can begin program number 24. I'm just going to read a little bit of a segue here. The goodwill effort of the world, which I sought earlier to inaugurate and to synthesize, has passed through a negative stage and through an interlude wherein it was not possible to work actively. So the 30s, as it were, gave way to the 40s, and active opposition against the forces of darkness was required, and not so much the spread of the goodwill work, though one had to keep the attitude of goodwill and make sure that no hate animated one's efforts. Simply the will to good without hate. So the needs of the new group of world servers calls it now into a renewed positive activity, that is, the goodwill work. The rediscovery and the immediate sustaining of the members of the group must be undertaken anew. It's if one has to start from the beginning. In all lands they must be reached. The men of goodwill, women of goodwill, and those who are even more committed, being members of the new group of world servers. In all lands, they must be reached and rehabilitated with wisdom and reestablished subjectively. So a lot of damage apparently was done. They must be aided objectively and again inspired to work in order that they may form the nucleus of the forces of reconstruction when the forces of light have won the victory. This is the first point. First point, which I would ask you to consider doing. It will be largely after the war, but preparation is made at this time, even in the midst of the war. So I've done what I said I would do and made up for the error that occurred on program number 18. Now, the second thing is to begin the dynamic use of another stanza of the Great Invocation. Begin the dynamic use of another stanza. Now he's going to introduce us to a very militant stanza. That which you have hitherto used has now served its immediate purpose. Of course, that implies, indeed, more purpose in the future, though it can again be called into use after the war is over. And even now, the forces of light are needed, and in our glamour-beset humanity, illumination is required. May the forces of light bring illumination to mankind. And the spirit of peace indeed must still be spread abroad. I give you now another set of phrases which can, if rightly used, invoke the forces of dynamic will onto the side of the forces of light. In a way, DK presented this possibility early on and then later acted, well, I don't know. It seemed that he was almost surprised, and members of the hierarchy were surprised that there was indeed a great response from the lords of liberation, and I suppose especially that lord who was concerned with freedom. So I give you another set of phrases which can, if rightly used, invoke the forces of divine will on the side of the forces of light. So, in other words, this is like an invocation to Shambhala. So, let's see here. Yeah. So, finding the right place. Invocation to Shambhala. Because the Lords of Liberation were, at least at that time, working through Shambhala, representing finally the three air signs, Aquarius, Gemini, and Libra. It is not easy to give an adequate translation or paraphrase of this power mantram. That's what it is. And of course, if you're familiar with it, you know that to be the case. And if you're not yet familiar with it, you will see that it is the case. Nor is it easy to step down sufficiently so that it may be safely used by all. Step it down sufficiently so that it can be safely used by all, yet at the same time preserve its challenging dynamic quality. The following sentences will suffice, however, and if you use them with focused intention and with the attitude of a sacrificial personality held silently dedicated in the light of the soul, much power may be generated. Okay, and of course, it can be said, look, there is the rise of fascism now again. Dictatorships are emerging, coming into vogue again. We don't have the precipitation of a war on the physical plane, fortunately, but there's a great undercurrent. Along the lines of power, which you may thus succeed in setting up, may come that which is needed to release humanity from the thraldom of evil, provided the nature of the sacrificial will is somewhat understood by you, and the sacrificial will is particularly the will that we find in the egoic lotus and associated with the sacrifice petals. So now we enter a description, a second series of phrases which are part of a power mantram, yes, released in 1940. Let the Lords of Liberation issue forth. Let them bring succor to the sons of men. Let the rider from the secret place come forth, and coming save. Come forth, O mighty one. And that rider from the secret place, you know, has been associated with the Kalki avatar and basically with the reappearing Christ. Let the souls of men awaken to the light, and let them stand with massed intent, you know, the Vulcanian spiritual will, we might say. Let the fiat of the Lord go forth, you know, that a word of power which cannot be resisted, must be obeyed. Let the fiat of the Lord go forth. The end of woe has come. Of course, this mantram is meant to precipitate the end of woe. It still took almost another 5 years for that precipitation to fall into place. Come forth, O mighty one. The hour of service of the saving force has now arrived, and what that force is, I think, is triple in nature, and it will be discussed. Let it be spread abroad, O mighty one. And the saving force, yes, generally considered to contain all three of the first three aspects of divinity. Let light and love and power and death fulfill the purpose of the coming one. Sometimes we sign our letters light, love, and power, and it seems to be uplifting. And if we were to sign it light, love, power, and death, and then put our name to it, it might be not so well received given our usual understanding of these things. That light and love and power and death, there's a lot of the power of Pluto in this mantram, fulfill the purpose of the coming one. I'm just kind of reading it through, and we'll get into the detailed analysis. The will to save is here. The love to carry forth the work is widely spread abroad because it is, the great motivating factor. The active aid of all who know the truth is also here. That's the third aspect of divinity, the ray of activity, the ray of abstract mind, the ray of creative intelligence. So the first three aspects are right there. The active aid of all who know the truth is also here. In other words, we have what we need. Come forth, O mighty one, and blend these three. Construct a great defending wall, of energy protecting the forces of light and those who fight upon the side of the forces of light, the rule of evil now must end. And at that time, it pretty much was the rule of evil because the Allied forces, without the help of the United States and with Russia not yet engaged, the Allied forces were going down. They were being overcome. So, of course, this mantram, like the first, should be memorized and should be used and directed towards those counter forces of matter, of materialism, frustrating their efforts, stopping their advance wherever possible. And even now, the evil which is emergent again onto the etheric and physical planes must be driven back. Drive it back onto the astral plane, we learn in Rule 10. A powerful rule accompanied by meditations. We used to do this in the headquarters group of the Arcane School, and you weren't allowed in immediately, and after a while you could begin to meditate along those lines, and it was considered to be a very powerful meditation. I think it was done every Thursday before leaving. If, therefore, you will say these three stanzas with a focused affirmative will, a great potency will be released for the salvaging of humanity and the immediate defeat of the forces of aggression. I think we have to remember that now, even as these forces of aggression are beginning to rise and show themselves in ways that are oddly reminiscent of their earlier potent emergence before World War II actually hit the ground. So let's see. So use this stanza, he's basically saying. That's the second thing. And the first thing reviewing was to we must strengthen the hands of the new group of world servers and help them regather, because apparently they have been thrown into disarray. Okay. And we are to throw our complete will to good forward and against these forces which express through a kind of evil alliance upon the dense physical plane. and thereby help the achievement of a tangible victory for the forces of light. So we have to, I think I'm just going to put this, what we want to do, STRENGTH, strengthen the hands of the new group of world servers. That is something which in the Arcane School we always were attempting to do, and even now their efforts are desperately needed. Okay, so first thing, second thing, spread this mantram. And now we're going to kind of look shortly at the construction of this mantram, this power mantram. So there are 3 stanzas. It says 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 stanzas within the second invocation. So let's see if I can get this straight. Possibly 3 stanzas within the second Great Invocation. And if we can say these 3, and eventually, of course, all 3 Great Invocations, say them with affirmative will, a great potency may be released for the salvaging of humanity and the immediate defeat of the forces of aggression. So powerful is this mantram if it could only be said in that way, but many people rejected the utilization and the group utilization of this mantram, thinking that somehow because it was so forceful, it could not be a representation of the forces of good. But I would reiterate, says the Tibetan, that the use of these words must be accompanied by the dedication of your personality life to the cause of humanity and by the transmutation of the personal will into the sacrificial will of the soul. We can't just use the mantram to use the mantram. We have to find a way to throw our efforts into the task and at the same time accompany that active work by the esoteric process, which surely strengthens the outer work. The dedication of our personality life to the cause of humanity. Well, certainly now we can still do that, and by the transmutation of our personal will into the sacrificial will of the soul. There he does mention it, the sacrificial will of the soul. To pour forth, to make sacred, to give all one has, in short, to give. And finally, and let's call this third thing, okay, and I'll make finally big and juicy here. It's, finding one's way through the books is important, and it's easy to lose one's way in sub-points in outlines. Finally, third thing, I would ask you to get in touch as soon as you can with the headquarters of the Goodwill work and indicate also your willingness to cooperate to the fullest extent with the forces of light. So realizing that this might have been sent out to many who were not, shall we say, actively working with the Arcane School, DK is speaking directly to whomever may be reading this article. And ally yourself with the Goodwill work and contact them and work with them. That's what he's asking us to do. This will serve practically to focus your efforts. I would also ask you to make it possible to disseminate this article on the widest scale that is possible, so that the use of the new invocation may be widespread. spread. Now, later we're going to learn that the new invocation was not accepted as readily as was the very first invocation, which dwelt with goodwill and peace, and all those things that people think, well, in fact, they are really spiritual, and all of this call for destruction and opposition and battle is not as spiritual, you know. But I often use the analogy: would a spiritual surgeon admire the form of invasive processes that are going on in the body that he's working upon, or would he remove them? And the answer, of course, is obvious. Even today, this second great invocation is probably the one that is the least used. Anyway, there are many to whom it could be sent, and it would arouse them afresh, anew, to fresh activity and hopeful effort. Even today, this is so for those who can detect the seriousness of what is going on beneath the surface. Make it possible to disseminate this article on the widest scale that is possible, and let's call this, in a way, fourth thing. Yeah. F-O-U-R. Yeah. Whoop. I'll make that, a little bigger. Just be patient with me here. I'm hurrying as fast as I can. Okay. So I would ask you to use this new invocation with faith, for it blends into a magnetic unity the forces of the divine will to good, the love which underlies the efforts of hierarchy, and the intelligent activity of humanity, thus creating a reservoir of power into which the energy of the three divine centers can pour and upon which the forces of light can draw. So, will we again, do you think, enter into the use of this ancient invocation, or, in our view, has its time passed? The saying of this invocation is not a substitute for physical plane effort on your part. It is complementary to that, and the more you are serving upon the physical plane, the more effective will be the use of your new invocation. So, the dual life of the hierarchy, the dual life of the disciple, the dual life of the disciples parallels the dual life of hierarchy. So enter into battle for the Lord. That's one of those phrases associated with Aries. Enter into battle for the Lord. At this time, this terrible time, as he discusses it, in 1940, before the United States entered the war and before Russia was attacked along its somehow 3,000-mile frontier with Europe. Maybe those were among the mistakes that Hitler, who had no confidence in anyone but himself, made when he started directing the battle and micromanaging what was to be done in terms of German strategy. I said earlier that the war could have been averted from expression on the physical plane had the disciples and aspirants of the world measured up to their opportunity and responsibilities. Well, we have opportunities and responsibilities placed upon us now, and through all costs, or by all costs, at all costs. Precipitation onto the physical plane of a shooting war between those who are adversaries, this type of precipitation must be avoided. It still is a possibility. Maybe the greatest danger of it has passed. I don't know. I keep on seeing and feeling the incursions of the forces which set themselves against the hierarchical values which humanity has accepted and is trying to express. The Great Invocation was rendered relatively powerless from the angle of dynamic usefulness because the majority of those who used it turned it into a peace prayer. It was instead a great spiritually militant, invocative demand. This must not happen with this stanza of invocation. It has a demand. Well, let's see. This is the relative powerlessness of the Great Invocation from the time it was issued in 1935 because of the excessive passiveness of those who used it. Yeah. It is a demand. It is also an authoritative affirmation of existent fact. It sets in motion agencies and forces hitherto quiescent. And these can change the face of the world battlefield. It invokes the Prince of Peace, but he carries a sword, and the effects of his activity may prove surprising to those who see only the needs for the form aspect of humanity. That is the problem, of course. How form-bound are we in our perceptions? How much do we advocate for the preservation of form at all costs? Yes, it's very powerful. It's obvious that it has not been used to full efficiency, though it probably was effective. And it invokes the Prince of Peace, but he carries a sword. One of the powers of that sword is the sword of discrimination. I come to bring not peace, but the sword of discrimination between the good and the evil, expecting that responsive human beings will throw their energies on the side of the good. Okay. That strength and enlightenment may be yours, and the power to stand and the ability to fight for the release of humanity is the prayer and the appeal of your brother, the Tibetan. Okay. It's amazing how many letters he wrote in 1940. I'll just say this, that there came a time from 1942 to 1944 when he had to discontinue all writing. He could no longer do that. That strength and enlightenment may be yours, and the power to stand and the ability to fight for the release of humanity is the prayer and appeal of your brother, the Tibetan. You know, there's so many people today who are still subject to mobilization by power-hungry demagogues. To these people, this great invocation could also be addressed, because they must be released through our power to stand. Well, okay, friends, this is stanza 2 of the Great Invocation, and let's just say that 45 minutes have passed in this program. 45 minutes passed, and I think that might be a program too short. So we will get now into the Great Invocation, and it will be a lengthy discussion, and it will be from line to line. And we may find that it is very valuable in these days when sensitive people sense the hidden onslaught of those who have again crept through the door which was left ajar, the door where evil dwells. So those who may listen to this after 2025, if there is anybody, will know the story, but I am predicting a real intensification in the house cleaning of governments. We already see it within the church, and it is dynamic. Finally, something's being done, especially under the auspices of Pope Francis. It had been much ignored before that. Now, governments have to clean the house. It's one of the requirements to prepare for the reappearance of the Christ. So rather than 45, it's going to be 47 seconds right now. And I will resume shortly with the discussion of the Great Invocation. Okay, friends, let's continue here. The Tibetan is now going to describe for us certain aspects of the second stanza of the Great Invocation, let the Lords of Liberation issue forth. We did read that in the previous section here in this number 24, program 24. So let's read ahead together. And he says, "It has seemed to me, after due thought, that it would serve a most useful purpose if I elucidated somewhat the theme of the new invocation and dealt also with the idea of divine intervention." And we do remember that, in fact, it was the Lords of Liberation who did intervene in the situation in the late part of 1942. Even though it might have been better under most circumstances to let humanity work out its own issues, however, it did seem that humanity would go down to defeat, and hence when the inchoate invocation of the masses of people plus the more targeted invocatory work of the disciples reached upwards toward them, they did act. And DK says he could not really describe what they did, but he described enough to know that the German scientists did not receive what they needed to complete an atom bomb, because the stream of knowledge necessary was deflected away from them. There is much loose thinking in this connection, due to the truth as well as the misinterpretation of the Christian teaching anent the return of the Christ. So the idea, we're looking at divine intervention here, and we could say that the return of the Christ, so anticipated, is, in a way, a divine intervention. Men's theological, analytical minds have distorted God's revelation, and I would like to do something to produce a wiser attitude to the reality of this inevitable return. This loose thinking prevents much intelligent and cooperative work. I would remind you that the success of invocation and the true efficacy of prayer are dependent upon clear thinking and not upon emotional desire or a powerful wish complex. So here he's telling us something about the effectiveness of the invocatory or invocative approach. They are dependent too upon a certain dynamic freshness and enthusiasm which it is hard to attain in a time of stress and strain. The particular time is peculiarly hard. Perhaps a clearer understanding of the nature and purpose of divine intervention may clarify somewhat the issue. Yeah, okay. To the casual thinker and the untrained occult student, I suppose from the perspective of the masters, we are all that. And the untrained occult student, it might appear that given an almighty deity or planetary logos, he could with little trouble and much usefulness and compassion intervene in this sad world situation and bring to an end the warring of the nations through the medium of some spectacular happening, some dramatic cataclysm or natural process, or some supreme appearing which would work much good. Okay. Yes, and this, of course, is what many do long for and even expect. It could be argued, conclusively convince the attacking aggressive groups that their day is ended and that their effort had better be drawn to an immediate finish. Would that it were so relatively simple a matter, but the laws of nature, the free will of humanity itself, and the inevitability of karma combine to prevent an intervention in just these terms. And now let's see how he explains this. Because after all, we are a system within a system within a system, and so it goes. And there are cosmic laws also to which our planetary logos must ascribe, must submit. Solar systemic laws within the one about whom naught may be said, and beyond and beyond. We are just a tiny mite of a planet and must ascribe to the greater hierarchical wills. This does not mean that some form of intervention may not be possible, but it must conform to law. It must not interfere with humanity's right to handle its own affairs, and it must be timed in such a way that the best and maximum results can be attained. So there is a reduction in the expectation. Excuse me. Something can be done, and it looks like something was done. I would like, first of all, to touch upon the 3 points which I have made above: natural law, free will, and karma. Okay. In so doing, I may succeed in clearing up some of the confused thinking of many students. Natural law, let's bring this to a greater noticeability. Natural law is the inevitable working out upon the physical plane of forces and energies which have long been generated. People are apt to think that these must lie outside of human control and constitute part of the inscrutable will of God, and that with them man has naught to do. When it is realized that certain aspects of natural law are concerned purely with forces, subterranean, superficial, and aerial, of our planet, the premise will be seen as correct in the present condition of the mental attitudes of the race, and will remain so for a very long time. Is it so that with these man has naught to do? Forces subterranean, which we cannot contact; forces superficial, more of which we contact; forces aerial, if they are Davic forces, we have not yet really contacted them. There are, nevertheless, causes and effects which can come under the category of natural law, which as yet are yet not so far removed from human control. Okay. For ages, man has generated energies which must inevitably produce effects upon the physical plane, evoke response upon the plane of emotions, and induce mental reactions. It is here that natural law and the law of karma meet and interact upon each other. Yes, it was seeming to be the case that karma would be involved in the working out of that which has been generated. Okay, it is here that natural law and the law of karma do meet each other. So let's look at the definition again. Natural law is the inevitable working out upon the physical plane of forces and energies which have long been generated. Yes, we'll hold that in mind. There are many people today who find an alibi for themselves in the present world situation, and a consequent release from action, definite action and responsibility, by saying that what is today happening is simply karma, or the working out of cause and effect, and that there is nothing, therefore, they can do about it. They take the position that it is not their affair, and that in due course of time the process will be worked out and everything will be right again. The slate will then be cleaner, and incidentally, they will not have been embroiled, but will have safely, even if uncomfortably, looked on. All right. This is the, let's just say here, today's alibi for many. Okay. But there's a problem with this. In so doing, they overlook the third aspect of the same law, to which we give the name of free will. Okay. This is the problem. He's trying to correct our attitudes. It's obvious. It is the right use of the free will and its understanding expression which must eventually straighten out and adjust the working out of karma and transmute that which now works such evil and havoc in the world, into a demonstration of good and of the successful foundation for the pursuit of true happiness. So it is the right use of free will which must correct the situation. Okay. And its understanding expression, which must eventually straighten out and adjust the working out of karma and transmute that which now works such evil and havoc in the world into a demonstration of good and of the successful foundation for the pursuit of true happiness. Therefore, those who are looking on at the tragic suffering of humanity and refuse to be implicated and thus succeed in evading responsibility as an integral part of the human family are definitely storing up for themselves much evil karma. Yes. So let us somehow remember this to be true, and that our application of whatever good may be within us through the use of goodwill, and even, if we can, the will to good, is required to straighten out the situation. Do we wish to rely upon others to do this? And by the way, this is the end of about 1 hour of programming on this particular program 24. In some way, they must learn participation because the present world situation has in it the seeds of release for humanity when the nature of evil is somewhat grasped, and above all, when the oneness of humanity and the rights of the human beings, are truly recognized. So these are people who must learn participation, and holding themselves aloof is, what can we say, the great heresy of separateness. They are victims of the great heresy of separateness. Those who war against the race of men and who seek to wrest from them their God-given goal of freedom must be driven back from whence they came. We might say, back onto the astral plane. Those who refuse to share in that struggle for freedom will be left out of the gains of freedom, even if it only means within their own home limits, in their life habits and in their private circumstances. When I speak here of being driven back from whence they came, I am using phrases in both the simple and the occult sense. So when we are driving certain forces in Rule 10, using the mantrams in Rule 10 to drive them back onto the astral plane, we are cooperating with the driving back of those who are making the life of humanity such a living hell. Okay, so It is therefore the free will and the will to good of humanity which must actively end the present conflict, not just waiting for it to be brought to a conclusion by others who are more brave. One of these, the first, concerns man's responsibility to man. I suppose that's free will. The other, rightly understood, concerns the right relationship of man to divine purpose. So let's just call this free will. And the other, rightly understood, concerns the right relationship of man to divine purpose. Let's do this correctly. His right orientation to the divine goodwill and his correct participation in its expression. Sometimes it seems that goodwill is an energy applied to those who have a lesser development than oneself, but not always. Where these conditions exist, there can be drawn forth an act of divine intervention. And that's, I think, the important point here. This whole section is dealing with that matter. So, the free will, the will to good, which must actively end the present conflict. So, I'll make them more noticeable and not fearful passivity. With the passivity, the motive of the passivity not really noticed. Where these conditions exist, there can be drawn forth an act of divine intervention. Natural law is today producing great changes in nature through the effect of aerial and physical combat, through the result of the fluid movement of whole sections of world population, and through the effects of vast economic changes and processes. Natural law. Changes are in process, and drastic changes in this year 2019 are so much in process that they may be beyond the point of possible correction. Conditions have been set in motion which must now work out to their predestined end, and it is the task of those who guide humanity spiritually to see that out of the surface evil and material activity good may eventuate, and that out of the wicked materialistic intent lying behind the present aggressive activity of certain groups, ultimate good may be engineered and the evil activity ended. Okay. So, and this whole idea that under natural law conditions have been set in motion which must work out to their predestined end, and this is where the idea of karma comes together with the idea of natural law. But this possible good will be the result of the spiritual activity of those who know the law and who understand the purpose of the will of God. It will be wrought out in spite of and not because of the brute force and the selfish goals of the world aggressors. These embody and in soul, that's the a hint there about that kind of overshadowing or obsession that dominated the main materialistic group of human beings leading the aggression on the physical plane. These embody and ensoul the materialistic forces of the planet in a manner utterly new in expression. So, this possible good will be the result of the spiritual activity of those who really understand the law. And in spite of the selfish goals and the brute force of the aggressors. I think, DK is not dealing with these factors in a thoroughly sequential manner. He's weaving them together, and we have to be able to follow that. Natural law, the law of karma, and here it is, natural law of free will, and the law of karma. These are being woven together, not in necessarily an easy to understand sequential pattern. But we get the main idea, I think, that that which man has generated will have its inevitable effect, and the karma, so to speak, the action that man has generated must meet him again. And apparently there were a lot of people evading responsibility, and I don't think that we would find it particularly different today regarding the evasion of responsibility, were the situation to become very, very serious. As a matter of fact, it's serious now, and people in the, let's say, the United States Senate seem to be abandoning their principles in favor of sustaining some kind of power. I think it could get worse before better. Okay. So where these conditions exist, there can be the divine intervention, free will, will to good, the right responsible action of man to man, the right responsible relationship of man to divine purpose, and his right orientation towards divine goodwill, and his correct participation in its expression. That's really important. And where these conditions exist, then in fact, yes, there will be the possibility of divine intervention. So right timing for the guides is of the essence. All right, now he seems to be dealing with, at first free will, here's karma, and maybe somewhere buried in here is natural law, but I think maybe he said what he has to say for the moment about natural law. So free will, let's take a look at it. Okay. Yes, and we'll make that, noticeable. Free will involves a basic understanding of the lines of world cleavage. It concerns right choice and consequent correct action for the group, and is determined every time by that which is right for the whole, and not so much by that which is right for the part. Humanity is only now reaching the point where free will can be of significant importance. There has been little free will to date. This is definitely the needed demonstration at this moment. All right, let's look here. And we see that the value system of the importance of the part over the whole is sustained. And the need to understand the cleavage between the directions of good and evil, this becomes necessary. It concerns right choice and consequent correct action for the group and is determined every time by that which is right for the whole and not so much by that which is right for the part, though he leaves the possibility open there that that which is right for the part is also of value. So only now is humanity reaching this point, and in terms of a deeper understanding of free will, he says there's been little of it to date, and this is definitely needed. This demonstration is needed at the moment. It is the lack of true free will which is today holding up the final activity. Well, all right. This is September of 1940. It is the lack of true free will which is today holding up, I suppose, the expeditious end of the war, the conflict. This is a statement of importance, and it is here that the great and free neutrals can give a right lead to human affairs. After all, they stand at the decision point, and quite a number of them opted not strictly to remain neutral in a cowardly manner, but to send in their volunteers, especially, as he says, to help the UK. Aggression, fear, terror, foreboding, and the numbness that comes from undue and ceaseless mental and physical pain are stultifying and negating free will in many sections of the world at this time. There is no free will in many parts of Europe today. Okay. Well, you know, this idea of fatigue can compromise every system within the human nature and can paralyze the exercise of will. All right. Undue and ceaseless mental and physical pain. Negating free will. There is no free will in many parts of Europe today, and those are the parts, I suppose, where there is no possibility of choice because they have been utterly conquered and subdued. Whoop. That's pretty big. Prejudice, the misinterpretation of the presented facts, false and overemphasized idealism, racial and nationalistic thought forms, and the withdrawing fear of responsibility are hindering the expression of free will in the less damaged parts of the world. So what do we say? That free will is not faring so well at that time. So here's what prejudice is. Okay, and how it is hindering this free choice, which is the God-given right of every human being. Moral unpreparedness and the refusal to relinquish the many and differing misinterpretations of truth or of Christ's teaching are hindering many people as well. So it was not a pretty picture, and not one that promised release. He's talking about the different factors which inhibit the truly responsible expression of free will. Release for humanity will come when the so-called good people of the world give up their pet theories and their beloved ideals and grasp the essential fact that entry into the kingdom of heaven and into the new age will take place when mankind is truly loved and selflessly served, and when the true divine purpose is seen and humanity is found as one indivisible whole. So only then will release come, and it's as much of a problem then, I believe, or now as it has been then. I believe so. The so-called good people who are obstructed by many habits not conducive to release. So the kingdom of heaven is the higher mental plane and beyond, and entry into that in a meditative and appreciative mode cannot take place until mankind is truly loved and selfishly served, and the wholeness of humanity is appreciated. Well, we are still living in a fragmented and fragmentary world, and the wholeness of humanity is not yet appreciated. But something will occur which brings human beings together. Will it be the threat of annihilation through climate change? It's difficult to say. Then, once this indivisible wholeness is realized, and every day some attention should be given to the realization of that wholeness. There's something that lies behind, within, supporting, which is not the form, which is sensed to be utterly different from the form, and yet exactly is the form. In other words, the generator of the form. Sometimes it may come upon you that whatever you look at is revealed to you as substandard by one identical factor, the presence or being or whatever you want to call it. So then petty nationalisms, religious differences, and selfish idealisms, for that is what they often are, as most people are idealists because they seek to save their own souls, their own lives and their own souls. And what an indictment that is. We're being indicted here, Indictment again. Yes, save their own souls. And we may notice that in Christianity and many sects of it, the concern with saving one's own soul and avoiding pain and damnation and perpetuity in hellfire is the foremost thought of these rather spiritually selfish people. The fact that their identity could be spread to everyone, and whenever another identity is found, that identity is they themselves, that thought, and certainly that experience does not enter their consciousness. So then the petty nationalisms, religious differences, selfish idealisms, for that is what they often are, as most people are idealists because they seek to save their own souls, are subordinated to human need, human good, and the future happiness of the whole. It is such an easy thing to say and to perhaps consider, and so difficult of achievement because the forces within the human being, residual forces, are so resistant. The simplification of the attitude of men is the crying need at this time. Well, let's really make that one of those foundational sentences. I'll read it again in just a minute. Yeah. The simplification of the attitude of men is the crying need of the time. When I look at some of the truly great souls, I kind of look at Ramakrishna's possessions. It may have been a bed, a pair of shoes, something to put on his body, maybe a drinking cup, a pitcher, a little table beside his bed. That was it. That was it. What else did he need, being such an advanced soul? His consciousness was entirely out of the realm of material unreality, though still serving those imprisoned in that unreality. Ideologies must go, old ideals must be relinquished, petty political, religious, and social schemes must be discarded, and the one driving purpose and the one outstanding determination must be the release of humanity from the imposition of fear, from enforced slavery, and it's still happening, and the reinstatement of men in freedom and with due opportunity to express themselves through right human relations. Well, there it is. We have a sentence which encapsulates. So let's just say these are the ejections. These are the ejections, bringing release. And I don't think there's one of us who does not crave in some way release from the limitations of one's present circumstance. It just depends on whether that release is considered for selfish purposes or for higher motives. If it's true that to those who give shall be given so that they can give again, it's true that those whose motive is the release of others are released themselves so that they can help in the release of others, whom they discover, after all, to be the only one thing. And that's so important, regardless of the diversity of form, to discover yourself and all others, and really all expressions of life, to be the only one thing. I think the divine Pimander, it may have been a Neoplatonic text. It begins with that, some recognition of the only one thing. But anyway, well, I'm just going to read this again so that we can take stock of where we are and what we have to discard. Ideologies must go. They're not really realities, are they? But they are helpful at times. Old ideals must be relinquished. They don't lead to anything that is current with the divine plan. Petty political, religious, and social schemes must be discarded. They're too small for the greatness of the divine plan. And the one driving purpose and the one outstanding determination must be the release of humanity from the imposition of fear, and through that imposition the Black Lodge works. From enforced slavery, they do seek to enslave the planet and all forms of life upon it, and certainly the human being, and the reinstatement of men in freedom, kind of like, restoration of the plan, right? The reinstatement of men in freedom and with due opportunity to express themselves through right human relations. This is what is involved in the simplification of life, of which he speaks. So sometimes when we think about simplification, we have the problem that we think we may be deprived of something we were holding on to before. But in fact, the way may be cleared for us actually to reach the highest values, because there's just so much impedimenta that's been discarded and is now out of the way. But these desirable objectives, of them, he says, this is not as yet possible. And it is the appalling situation of terror, of slavery, and of imposed and penalizing rule which is breaking the heart of humanity. I think he means that quite literally and from an occult perspective, and causing deep distress and questioning in those whose hearts are not yet so broken. And if you break a heart, you get rid of the possibility of the good motivations. You find that there is not enough energy and too much internal division for people with a broken heart to arouse themselves to constructive action. It's funny how they've discovered, how one can even die of a broken heart, and some kind of physical manifestation occurs when that is the case. All right, now what we've done is we have, this is the end. Well, come on now. End of 1.5 plus hours. Not much plus there, pretty much 1.5 hours. I'm going to take the slightest break, and then I hope to come back. We've dealt with natural law. We've dealt with free will, whether man really has that and can exercise it. Certainly not all men have it activated because of the absolute opposition of their circumstances. It just militates against the possibility of free choice. So we've done 2 of these, and now karma will be undertaken to understand there is no free will in many parts of Europe today. You kind of wonder then about the places which Japan subdued. Free will is here. Natural law is here. I think, the best thing to do would be to put it in such a lettering that it cannot be overlooked. Yes, and finally, natural law, free will, and karma. Okay. So we get into the karmic factor in just a moment. What I'm trying to do is okay, friends. A little bit of a break here. I don't know. I'm beginning to wonder, when Pisces approaches, whether things don't go out to sea. There's been a 1 minute approximately hiatus here, a break, when the audio has been lost. So I'm simply hoping that if you reach this point, you stay with it. About 1.5 hours have been offered in the programming. Let's talk about karma a little bit, and we'll make this red so that it kind of equals natural law and free will. All right, so my hope is that we can continue correctly. As to karma, what man has made, he can unmake. It kind of suggests that old saying, well, you make your bed and then you lie in it. But of course, before jumping into bed, you could remake it, and it would be an altogether more pleasant experience. We cannot overcome we will confront circumstances and energies and forces which we have set in motion. What man has made, he can unmake. This is oft forgotten. Karma is not a hard and fast rule. It's more of the nature of a chemical reaction, I think. And new ingredients can be added. It's kind of the way that Master M tells us when the arrows of karma are coming for you. These are not his words, okay? Don't be a sitting duck. Keep moving. And those arrows will not hit with the same force, and they may glance off you. So you set in motion certain useful and good activities, and the blows of karma are lessened. It is not a hard and fast rule. It is changeable according to man's attitude and desire. It is the presenting of the opportunity to change. This grows out of past activities, and these, rightly met and correctly handled, lay the foundation for future happiness and progress. So this is an example of a kind of deeper understanding of karma, a deeper understanding. Changeable according to man's attitude and desire. It is the presenting of opportunity to change. So we're up against Saturn. Saturn is a third ray adaptable planet in one of its major rays. And we are given the opportunity to face in a new way and rightly the kinds of things which have long been habitual in our nature and which we set in motion. The present situation is the fault of all peoples in all countries, particularly the more intelligent, so you'll kind of wonder whether you're taking in some moonshine causes, and includes also the great neutrals, if the law of rebirth and of joint responsibility means anything at all. So when a great emergency befalls humanity, we cannot, through the agency of the heresy of separateness, isolate ourselves and say, okay, this is not our responsibility. Karma is not all that is bad and evil. Men make it so through their stupidities. There are today great forces of evil seeking expression in this world. the 6 leaders in the East and the 6 leaders in the West, and who knows what's behind them. These emerge out of the past and seek to determine and bring about a very evil future wherein selfishness, material objectives, and the good and well-being of one race out of the many must be imposed upon the world, a world which innately revolts against such an imposition and distortion of reality. I think one already sees in this current year, as the forces of materialism again are subtly making their way forward, there is a revolt. And people who have stood up for strong progressive principles over many years are revolting against this attempted imposition of a very limiting evil and selfishness of a disgusting kind. So karma is not all bad. Men make it that way. Through their stupidities, we just don't know how to handle opportunity. Of all things, let's remember that Saturn, the planet of karma, is also the planet of opportunity. You can face the old patterns and adapt to them, and you can change them and instill new habits and new character and new destiny, as the idea goes, sow a thought, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap character, sow character, reap destiny. So the great forces of evil, beyond our comprehension, it's hateful lust, these forces, the forces of wickedness and hateful lust, they're seeking expression in the world, emerging out of the place what's called endless death. They emerge out of the past and seek to determine and bring about a very evil future where there will be imposition. They emerge out of the past, and not the good of the whole, but the good of one race will be imposed. Well, it's a good thing that our superiors are dedicated to the handling of this kind of evil, because I don't think we are capable ourselves. Some people rebel against the statement in the Great Invocation, which involves sealing the door where evil dwells, and they think perhaps that they are up to the task of doing so, but of course they are not. It's just their naivete in occult matters that cause them to criticize the idea that for a time there must be a sealing of the door where evil dwells, at least a sealing with respect to humanity. So a world which innately revolts against such an imposition and distortion of reality, you cannot exalt the part over the whole. That, of course, is ultimate egotism. The force of evil example is shown in the fact that two other races seek abjectly to copy or aid the forces of aggression, focused at this time through the aggressor race, and let's just say, is not allowed. So is he calling the German race an aggressor race? I think so. And he's saying that there's an abject slavish Italian and Japanese following of the example of the aggressor race. The force of evil example comes forth, just like the force of good example can come forth. Men are often imitative of those in more power, who have more power than they do. At the same time, the forces of good are seeking to offset this imposition of material selfishness and are now at bay, or bayonet, with the issue still undecided except upon the mental plane. These forces of good are not yet advantaged in the conflict, but at least mentally they have made up their mind about what must transpire. They are still being overcome, still being driven, but upon the mental plane, they have made their decision. It has yet to work out as the triumph of good upon the physical plane. When those who are not so drastically implicated in the present conflict relinquish their selfishness and, what can we say, USA, in this case, their prejudices and their interpretations, and see the basic duality of this conflict in its true light, they will throw the weight of their influence increasingly on the side of goodwill and right human relations. So he really asks the neutrals to join in, doesn't he? He asks that. And yesterday I looked up what those neutral nations were, and we saw, in fact, that some of them, as the war progressed, did send their volunteer brigades to assist the Allies, especially, I guess, the United Kingdom. All right. So as these withholding nations, neutral, fearful, selfish, etc., no matter by what ideal their action may be justified, as they begin to throw the weight of their influence on the side of goodwill and right relations, then the bad karma which they apparently placidly accept for others and reject for themselves will be changed into good karma, which is the true destiny of humanity and will usher in the new era of joy and of peace and of spiritual synthesis, the synthesis which we call brotherhood. Well, that's a very promising prediction, and so often fear I'm sorry for those coughs. So often it is fear which prevents us from doing the right thing, but when your dignity is up against the wall, so to speak, and you realize the cravenness, the craven attitudes that you've been giving into, then there come these moments of choice when fear will be overcome and the right will be done. So much of what he's writing about here is meant to stir the neutral nations, of which the strongest would be the United States at this time. And of course, the United States was stirred because there was a great disciple in charge as the president. If you compare Lincoln and Roosevelt, let us say, as great presidents, and you compare them to some who have appeared in that role in an unwarranted manner, well, there's just a gulf between those who truly understand the larger picture and the good, and those who understand and crave the exaltation of their own petty ego. It is because of the delay in right understanding and the slowness of many to appreciate the true situation that those who guide the race and work on the spiritual side of life have been unable to do much up to date except spiritually strengthen the hands of the workers of the forces of light. Well, we can't emerge from these pages that Master DK is presenting to us in any type of passive mode when confronted with the fact that the Black Lodge and the White Lodge are still fighting it out. Even though, again, the conflict is rather underground, though lately emerging more on the physical plane. The faith of many has kept the door ajar to the forces of light, yet even these have forgotten frequently that faith without works is dead. So, the question so often in Christianity, are you saved by faith or you're saved by works? And it's just so obvious, whatever saving means, really. You're saved by both. And may we remember that. Faith and works. It is only when faith finds active expression upon the physical plane in right cooperation, that's the energy of love and unity, and sacrifice, even unto death, the sacrifice petals of the egoic lotus, that the door can be forced wide open and divine intervention becomes possible. This is one of those pivotal sentences which must be enlarged beyond all reason. Okay, and there it is. It is only when faith finds active expression upon the physical plane in right cooperation and sacrifice even unto death that the door can be forced wide open and divine intervention is possible. Then the superior powers realize that humanity has done everything it can, and aid can be rightly given. It is only when the vision and the dream of peace gives way, which beguiles so many well-meaning people, gives way to the determination to take every possible means to achieve that peace in practical ways upon the physical plane, that the inner spiritual forces will be enabled to work also more actively on earth. And we might ask, what does this say about the reappearance of the Christ? What does it say? Because obviously something, he is and will be a divine intervention, something about humanity's extremity, having offered all that it can do, all that it can bring to the solution of maybe really terrible problems, that this kind of offering has to come before the Christ can return into visibility. So, we might say that much will be exacted from humanity before the long-awaited interventions can occur. Now, does this fill us with terror and dread that so much will be demanded of us before the great forces can make their presence felt? I think, what we see, or we did see in 1942, that what humanity could do, it did do, and therefore the decision was made, if we cannot expect anything more from humanity, what would be the effect of our intervention? So curiously enough, now this is the forces of light, they Okay, FOLS. Now, what do I mean by that? Occasionally I have to put one of those in, don't I? Okay, so these are the forces of light, LS. Forces of light. Right. So occasionally, there will be such extremity in humanity that these higher forces, who after all do seek to preserve the planet as the base of the spine chakra of the solar logos, will intervene. So curiously enough, they are often hindered today by the idealists who love their ideals more than they love humanity. That's often the case when comparing the sixth ray and the second, and who cling to their special interpretations of what they think Christ meant, at the same time excluding that real love which characterized his every act and which would drive them into active selfless service to the forces of light. Okay, so it's those who could bring relief, who are hindered more by certain well-meaning but blind types, who are the idealists, and they contrast the sixth ray with the second. It's so often the case with the sixth ray that the ideal is loved more than humanity itself. They do nothing to bring the conflict to an end because they are preoccupied with their own dreams, ideals, and interpretations. I say to myself, if I had been living then and not just, a small child, would this have been true of me? And we can ask, would this have been true of any of us? Would we have entered into the fray? Do we know? They're preoccupied with their own dreams, ideals, and interpretations. When they can let go because of these, let these go because they love humanity, then the new vision will come and the world will be saved. The forces of light will find potent expression, and the forces of aggression will go down to defeat. So basically, we are dealing with the idea that it is love that saves, and not idealism, selfish idealism, which ignores those who should be loved. Well, we can ponder on that. You can, when you find something that is worth thinking about, something perhaps that Master DK has said, just turn the video onto pause and ponder it together in a small group or by yourself. So we can, this is the contrast between the often quite narrow sixth ray that would love the Bible, let us say, more than it loves the people whom Christ came to serve and save. Then the world will be saved. So let's think about that and who and what we love. It's possible to get so wrapped up in secondary things. Given, therefore, an eventual fusing of vision and physical plane activity, the major need at this time, isn't it the need in the life of all of us, really, what form is it possible for the hoped for divine intervention to take? This is 1940, and 2.5 years later, or 2 years and a few months later, there was a divine intervention from the Lords of Liberation. And he says, I make no prophecies. All that I seek to show is that the blocking or hindrance is to be found today on the side of humanity. Well, we're always in our own way, aren't we? Certainly the vast love and compassion and understanding of the higher forces never holds back what can be rightly given. It does not lie on the side of the forces of light, love, and love, light, life, and love. It is not to be found on the side of Christ and his disciples or the masters of the wisdom, as these under diverse names constitute the spiritual hierarchy of the planet. So, no blockage here. Call them by what name you choose. The most cherished belief of humanity is that there exists in the world always and forever a hidden reality, those who have conquered death. Well, I guess this is a universal belief, and it brings great assurance that we too may conquer death. Who have conquered death, who possess illimitable powers to help, and who can be reached by prayer and invocation. Yes, this great belief exists and is a comfort and encouragement to so many in their dire circumstances. Maybe just a little bit more, and I will turn this over into a program that I will send you. It is the potency and grasp of things material and the fact of undivided focus upon the physical plane that has given the forces of aggression so much success up to the present time. The grasp of material things and the single eye, even though that single eye is directed to spiritually unworthy objectives. These forces, through their very potency, have fused and blended together a group of 7 men who personify in themselves great and specific aspects of material forces connected with the 7 types of energy in their lowest and most material expression and their manifestations, war, fear, and cruelty. Well, this is the dramatic truth. Of course, sometime, I think, in October of 1946, it all came to an end, and these men, abandoned by their obsessors, faced hanging or escaped through suicide. They are united by one point of view and by one goal, and hence their success. That's the whole key, isn't it? To be one-pointed, whether for good or ill, and they had learned how to be one-pointed for planetary ill. It is interesting that, again in their case, there appears inevitably an initiatory 7, the base and dark parallel of the initiating 7 who lead human beings into light, and who are symbolized in the 7 Masons who constitute a lodge of Masons, which of course represents the hierarchical process of elevation and initiation. Nothing like this base and low demonstration, however much Masonry has been wrongly criticized. They are the custodians of forces which control them and over which they themselves have no slightest control. And there were, beings that we're not supposed to really think about very much, because we'll have to recognize that it's fruitless to do so and dangerous to do so. You ask who are these 7R, and he'll list them: Hitler, von Ribbentrop, Goebbels, Goering, Hess, Himmler, and Streicher. Names well known to us all. 1, 2, 3 committed suicide, apparently: Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels. 1 parachuted into England on a quixotic quest, and no, I guess 4 committed suicide. Yeah, and that was Hess. But the suicides were, unless Hitler did make it to South America, one of those theories, Hitler, Goebbels, Goering, and Himmler, all 4 committed suicide. Others who were hanged were of less moment. Streicher was pretty well an awful man who ran the rag called Der Stürmer. It was just anti-Semitic rant, just huge distortions. And I think von Ribbentrop and Streicher were both hanged, and Hess lived out his life imprisonment in England. These men embody and personify the forces of aggression and rule by fear, not only the enslaved nations, but also their few allies who are not by any means in the same category of power, fortunately for them. So here are 7, as they are gathered under the inverted Shambhala force and representing opposition to all that is good, high, ashramic, and initiatory. And fortunately, it seems that Italy, and maybe Japan, I think so, Italy and Japan are not in the same category. Well, okay, I've had my fair share of audio difficulties, and I'm hoping that when you run into a little hiatus, and I seem to be pantomiming or something's happening there, or the sound seems frozen, just go ahead a bit and you should find the sound again. So we're on page 258, and I'll go back to the beginning here. 248 to 258, 10 pages. Well worth our consideration, I dare say. So this is 248 and to 258. Okay. And whatever date this will be, whether today or another day, I cannot say. But what I will do is just bring this down to where we are to preserve some semblance of order so that we can assimilate more easily. Okay. 1, 2. Here we are. And we'll let it go at that. And we're ending here on the 18th of February. And we'll move forward. We really have done, just about exactly 200 pages in this book, and As I say, another 500 remain. And I think we have seen that though the topical focus is the war, the second phase of the Great War, and the period surrounding it and immediately following it until the Alice Bailey's death, then there's much. In addition, there's much given, which has immediate application to the life of any disciple who really wants to be part of the new group of world service and really wants to help humanity arise. So, this is about a 2-hour program, a little more. And if you run into one of those sound breaks, just hang in there. It will all come right, is my hope. Okay. Yeah. All right, friends. So we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty and the ways that the Christ and the Buddha helped in this great conflict and what divine intervention really is. And we've seen that we have to create a vacuum. It's always the case in occultism. If you want an inflow of higher energies, you have to create the vacuum. And the vacuum is created in this case by offering all we have in service to the race and to the planet. Then the possibility of intervention will exist. Then and only then. Then the good can descend, because that which has been the subject of preoccupation is cleared out of the way, and there will be no blockage. So let's see if we can really remember that fact. Okay, and in our own personal, individual life of discipleship. Okay, see you soon. Study hard, elaborate on all this. You have your ideas, I have mine. If mine are useful to you, that's great. Or if not, then you have your ideas, and certainly Master DK has presented an authoritative point of view that we would be wise to heed. See you then. Bye-bye.